What happens when a former royal, used to deference and cameras, walks into the ring with one of America's sharpest late-night provocateurs? What begins as polite chatter can quickly spiral into raw confrontation, the kind of television no palace training or media coaching can contain. Tonight, Prince Harry stepped onto the Gutfeld show expecting applause and gentle questions. What he got instead was something far different. A host unwilling to play along with royal PR, and a clash that turned into one of the most unforgettable interviews in recent memory. The studio lights burned bright, reflecting off Greg's glossy desk as he sat with his trademark half-smile. The announcer's booming voice carried through the room. "Please welcome Prince Harry." Harry strode out, shoulders back, jaw tight, radiating a confidence that some might easily call arrogance. He wore a tailored dark suit, tieless, aiming for casual charm. But his eyes betrayed sharpness, a look suggesting he wasn't here to be questioned, but to be admired. Greg rose to greet him with a handshake. Harry accepted with a brief squeeze, no smile. The Duke eased into the guest chair, crossing one leg with deliberate slowness that felt almost entitled. "Harry," Greg began warmly, "thanks for coming on. I know you've been busy. California life, media projects, new ventures. It's good to have you here." "Of course," Harry replied, his accent crisp but his tone clipped. "I suppose it's only fair I give your viewers the chance to hear from me directly instead of the nonsense they usually consume." The audience chuckled uneasily. Greg's smirk twitched. He wasn't used to being brushed off this early in an interview. Still, he pressed forward. "Well," Greg said, leaning back casually, "let's start light. How's married life treating you? Plenty of headlines about you and Meghan. People curious if California's been a good fit." Harry's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Married life is fine, Greg. More than fine, actually. But I find it amusing that everyone feels entitled to ask, as though it's anyone's business but ours." The tone was sharp, dismissive. Greg raised his brows, keeping his voice level. "Fair enough. But you've lived a very public life. That kind of curiosity comes with the territory, doesn't it?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "A territory I never asked for. But I suppose people like you have built quite a career dissecting things you don't understand." A murmur rippled through the audience. Greg chuckled lightly, masking the jab. "All right then, let's pivot. You've often said moving to America gave you freedom. Do you feel the British public ever truly understood you?" Harry leaned forward, posture stiff, voice tightening. "Understood me? They were fed lies, Greg," Harry said, his voice hard. "Decades of a toxic press obsessed with gossip and clicks, painting me as the reckless spare. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a calculated character assassination." "Strong words," Greg replied evenly. "But a lot of people in Britain would argue you turned your back on them, that you abandoned royal duty. How do you answer that?" Harry let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Criticism from people who bow to an institution that cages them in the first place. It's laughable. They cling to William and Kate like idols, blind to the rot in the system. At least I had the courage to leave." Gasps echoed through the studio. Greg's eyes flicked briefly toward the cameras, knowing the moment was pure gold. "Well," Greg said carefully, "since you mentioned William and Kate, many admire them for embracing the responsibility you walked away from. Do you?" Harry cut him off sharply. "Admire them, please. They've done nothing but pose for cameras, nod, smile, and hide behind palace walls. Americans worship them because they don't see the truth, and frankly, I'm done pretending they're saints." The words dropped heavy, lingering in the air. Greg tapped his pen lightly against his cards, his smirk fading into something more focused. "Interesting perspective," he said. "But your life now isn't exactly free of cameras either. Netflix, books, interviews. Some say you've monetized your exit very effectively. What do you say to them?" Harry leaned back, arms folding, his face set. "I'd say those people don't have the faintest idea what it's like to live under constant siege." I didn't monetize anything. I survived. If people can't handle me telling my story, maybe they should stop obsessing over me and get a hobby." The audience gave an awkward mix of nervous laughter and uneasy silence. The tension was building fast, the studio air thick with anticipation. Greg nodded slowly, his voice calm but sharper now, a spark flashing in his eyes. "All right, Harry. We'll get into all that. But you should know, I don't dodge tough questions, and tonight America wants real answers." Harry's stare was unyielding, his words daring. "Then you'd better be ready for real answers, Greg, not the fairy tales your viewers usually swallow." The polite interview had officially come off the rails. The audience could feel it. The applause sign blinked, but the clapping was hesitant, uneasy. They knew this wasn't just conversation anymore. This was a dual dot. Greg leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, eyes locked on Harry like a chess player, studying his opponent's next move. "Harry," Greg began slowly, his voice measured, "you've said leaving Britain was about freedom, about protecting your family. And yet since moving here, you've signed Netflix deals, a multi-million-dollar memoir, podcasts, endless interviews. Some people wonder, did you really leave duty behind or just swap one spotlight for another?" Harry smirked, shaking his head as if the question were beneath him. "Greg, I left because I refused to suffocate. You call it a spotlight. I call it survival. And if I'm speaking now, it's because my voice was stolen from me for years. I've earned the right to tell my story." Greg raised an eyebrow, his tone calm but edged. "But isn't it fair to say you've told that story many times already? Oprah, Netflix, Anderson Cooper, book tours. Critics suggest you've built an entire brand on victimhood." Harry's expression hardened, jaw tightening. "Critics? People with nothing better to do than tear down those actually living their lives. My wife and I are not victims. We're survivors. If people are tired of hearing my truth, they can stop listening. It's really that simple." The audience shifted in their seats, whispers rising like static dot. Greg smiled thinly, reading the room. "All right, let's talk about Meghan. Your marriage is constantly in the headlines, rumors, speculation, whispers of tension. How do you respond to people who say California isn't the fairy tale you promised it would be?" Harry leaned forward, his tone sharp with irritation. "Greg, I'll make this simple. My marriage is none of your business. None of their business either." He gestured toward the audience. "We're happy. Happier than most couples you'll find in this country. And frankly, it's insulting that I even have to dignify gossip with an answer." The words hit like a slap, tightening the air in the studio. Greg kept his voice steady. "I only ask because you've been very public about your relationship. When you go on record about your struggles, when you write about private arguments in your book, when you and Meghan sit down with Oprah, you make your marriage part of the public conversation. Isn't it fair for people to ask questions?" Harry's smirk returned, this time laced with venom. "Fair, Greg, the press has never played fair, and neither have people like you. You thrive on my personal life because without me, you'd have nothing to talk about. Admit it. My name keeps shows like this alive." The audience gasped audibly. Greg blinked, his smirk flickering, but he quickly recovered, leaning back and letting out a dry chuckle. "You give yourself a lot of credit, Harry. I assure you this show would be just fine without you." Harry scoffed loudly. "Would it? Or would you be back to cheap jokes and second-rate commentary?" Harry sneered. "Let's be honest, Greg. This is the most relevant your show has been in years." The temperature in the studio spiked. Even the cameraman shifted uneasy as Harry leaned back in his chair, smug satisfaction spread across his face. Greg inhaled slowly, choosing his words with precision. "All right, let's shift gears. You've spoken about the royals, about being trapped, unsupported. But some argue you didn't just abandon the institution. You abandoned your grandmother, your father, your brother. Do you regret how you left things?" Harry's eyes flashed, his voice sharp as glass. Regret? The only regret I have is not leaving sooner. My grandmother loved me, but she was chained to the system. My father and brother chose duty over family. That's their prison, not mine. I broke free. And frankly, I don't envy them one bit. The audience's murmurs turned into hushed, shocked whispers. Greg sat straighter, the smirk gone, his voice cutting now. You don't envy them? William and Kate are seen as the model of stability, of dignity. Meanwhile, you've made headlines for trashing your family, spilling private conversations, turning centuries of tradition into your personal grievance tour. Harry snapped his head toward him, tone icy. William and Kate live in a cage. A gilded cage, sure, but a cage all the same. They smile, they wave, they pretend, and Americans buy it. You call that dignity? I call it acting. At least I'm honest. Greg's pen tapped against the desk, this time sharp, deliberate. He leaned in, voice low but biting. Honest? You call this honesty? Cashing in on secrets, selling interviews, pointing fingers? That's not honesty, Harry. That's opportunism. And more people, myself included, wonder if you've mistaken rebellion for relevance. Harry's eyes narrowed. His body stiffened, unyielding. His voice came out low, firm, unshaken. Call it whatever you like, Greg. I know who I am. I don't need the approval of the British public, the American public, or a late-night host to validate my choices. I walked away from a corrupt system. If people can't accept that, that's their problem, not mine. The audience sat frozen now, the silence so heavy it was suffocating. Greg exhaled slowly, folding his arms across his chest, his eyes locked on Harry. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. All right, Harry, he said quietly, almost too calm. We'll see just how honest you really are. The duel lines were drawn. Harry sat there like a king without a crown. Throne or not, Harry sat like a man daring the world to challenge him. Across from him, Greg was calm but simmering, waiting for the right moment to strike. Everyone watching knew the storm wasn't over. It was just getting started. The studio was so quiet, the hum of the stage lights filled the air. Harry leaned back, arms folded, his face set in smug confidence as though he'd already won. Greg leaned in, elbows on the desk, his eyes sharp as a blade. Harry, Greg began, his tone low and precise, if the monarchy was so oppressive, so suffocating, why keep talking about it? Why build an entire career around the very thing? You claim you escaped, Harry let out a dry, humorless laugh. Because it matters, Greg. Exposing hypocrisy matters. Showing the world what happens behind palace walls matters. If my words make people uncomfortable, that's their problem. At least I'm not hiding. Greg tilted his head, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. Not hiding? That's rich. You left Britain demanding privacy, then signed a Netflix deal, dropped a tell-all book, and turned your life into prime-time content. That's not privacy, Harry. That's publicity with a paycheck. The audience erupted in a loud, "Oh!" The sting of the words echoing across the room. Harry's jaw tightened, his tone sharp. You think you're clever, don't you? Sitting there in your cheap suit, smirking, pretending you know what it's like to live under global scrutiny. You have no idea. Greg didn't blink. Cheap suit. Harry, I bought this myself. Can you say the same about half the things you've worn? Let's be real. Every privilege, every opportunity, every platform came from the Windsor name. Strip that away and you're just another guy in LA with too much free time. Gasps cut through the audience. Harry's ears burned red, and for the first time his certainty wavered. That's absurd, he snapped. I've built something of my own. I've created a life outside of that family. Greg leaned back, his voice calm but razor-sharp. No, Harry, you've monetized your family. Every dollar since leaving comes from your title, your drama, your grievances. Take that away, and what's left? A man in California, living in borrowed mansions, giving interviews about how unfair life has been. Harry's voice rose, brittle and defensive. That's a lie. Meghan and I have worked tirelessly to what? Greg cut in smoothly, to produce shows nobody watches, to give interviews about struggles most people would trade everything for, to brand yourself as an outcast while living off the fame and fortune of the institution you claim to despise. Harry's face flushed crimson, his hand gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. The polished calm Harry had carried into the studio, was gone. He leaned forward, finger jabbing toward Greg. "You don't know me. You don't know the pain, the isolation, the betrayal I've lived through. My wife and I—" Greg cut in, his tone suddenly like a blade. "Your wife? Let's talk about her for a second. She was an actress. She knew the spotlight. She thrived on it. And now the two of you have turned your marriage into a stage play, a brand. You really think people can't see through that?" The audience stirred, restless, uneasy. Harry's nostrils flared. His voice dropped cold and sharp. "Leave my wife out of this." Greg didn't blink. "Why? She's half the act. You preach about protecting your family, yet you've built an empire off exposing them. You cry about oppression while living in luxury, and you never miss a chance to throw William and Kate under the bus. Be honest, Harry. Isn't the real issue that you envy them? They kept their duty, their dignity. You chose self-pity." The words landed like daggers. Harry's face twisted, his composure slipping. For the first time, he looked less like a prince and more like a man cornered. His voice cracked when he fired back. "You don't understand a thing. William and Kate are puppets. They perform for the cameras. They're not free. I don't envy them. I pity them." Greg shook his head slowly, his tone controlled, steady, devastating. "No, Harry. You envy them because they don't need to sell their story to matter. They don't need Netflix deals, Oprah specials, or ghost-written memoirs. They serve, and people respect them. You left, and people rolled their eyes. That's the difference." Gasps rippled through the studio. A few nervous claps broke out, quickly drowned by whispers. Harry's composure collapsed further. His voice rose, hot with fury. "You arrogant little man, you think you can lecture me about my life? You've never walked a day in my shoes. You're just a commentator, a clown making cheap jokes for ratings." Greg leaned forward, his smile slow, sharp, deliberate. "And yet, here you are, on my show. Because without us, without the press, without the critics, without the very family you spend your life tearing apart, you're nothing but a title without a throne." The silence that followed was deafening. Harry's chest heaved, his fists clenched, his face crimson. The royal polish was gone. He looked rattled, exposed. Cornered. Greg sat back, calm restored, voice low but cutting. "So tell me, Harry," he asked, steel in every word, "who are you without them? Who are you, really?" "Without burning the whole house down just to keep themselves warm," Greg finished, his words ringing across the studio like a verdict. The audience gasped in unison. The tension was unbearable now, thick enough to choke on. Prince Harry's fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. For the first time all night, he looked cornered, not commanding. Greg didn't sit back down. He leaned across the desk, eyes locked on Harry, voice low but lethal. "You call yourself free, Harry, but free men don't spend years selling their pain to the highest bidder. Free men don't cash royalty into memoirs, documentaries, podcasts. That's not freedom. That's dependency on the very system you say you despise." Harry's lips trembled as he tried to form words. You're twisting everything. You don't know what it's like to—" Greg cut him off again, louder now, his voice carrying like a gavel. "What it's like. I know what it looks like, and what it looks like is this: William and Kate serving with dignity, while you sit here drowning in bitterness, pretending it's bravery. They didn't have to leave to be respected. You left, and respect is the one thing you'll never get back." The studio broke into shocked murmurs. A few claps scattered through the air, hesitant but real. Harry's face contorted, rage and humiliation fighting for dominance. "This interview is over," Harry shouted, yanking the microphone from his lapel. The static cracked through the speakers as he ripped it free. The chair screeched back as he stormed toward the curtain, his polished royal mask shattered into something raw and ugly. The cameras followed him just long enough to catch his back disappearing off stage. Greg turned slowly toward the audience, his posture calm, his voice steady but firm. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, Prince Harry, a man who says he wants privacy but can't resist the spotlight. A man who left a throne, but still hasn't found a crown of his own. The audience erupted. Half applause, half stunned disbelief. Greg straightened his note cards, took a slow sip of his drink, and looked straight into the camera with a razor-edged smile. We'll be right back. The music swelled, the lights dimmed, and the screen cut to commercial, leaving millions of viewers buzzing with the knowledge they had just witnessed one of the most explosive interviews in late-night television history. What Greg said next cut like a blade. The difference, Harry, is that they grew up. You didn't. You're not a survivor, you're not a leader, you're not even a royal anymore. You're just a man clinging to the scraps of a title you no longer deserve. The words landed like gunfire. The studio erupted. Gasps, nervous laughter, scattered applause. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as every eye darted between the two men. Harry froze, his face paling, then flushing red. For a brief moment, hurt flickered behind his fury. His lips trembled before he finally snapped, his voice breaking as he shouted, "You think you can humiliate me on your show? You think you get to define who I am? I don't have to sit here. And take this." He ripped the microphone from his collar, tossing it onto the chair with a sharp crack that echoed through the studio. "This is beneath me. You're beneath me. I won't be part of this circus another second." With that, Harry shot up, his footsteps pounding against the stage. Shoulders stiff, back straight, he stormed toward the curtain and vanished without a glance back. For a moment, the studio sat frozen in stunned silence. Not a clap, not a whisper, just the sound of the stage lights humming overhead. Then slowly all eyes turned back to Greg. The host adjusted his jacket, his smirk curling back across his face like he'd been waiting for this very moment. He lowered himself calmly into his chair, tapped his pen against the desk, and locked eyes with the camera. "Well," Greg said dryly, his tone dripping with irony, "there you have it, a man who begged for privacy, storming off live television. A man who preaches honesty but walks out when the questions get real. A man who left the monarchy but clearly can't leave it behind." The audience broke into thunderous applause, cheers mixing with gasps as the tension finally spilled over. Greg leaned forward, his voice shifting into the cadence of a closing argument. "Here's the truth. Titles don't make character, palaces don't make integrity, and running away doesn't make you free, it just makes you lost. Prince Harry came here expecting deference. What he got instead was accountability, and clearly he couldn't handle it." The camera zoomed tight on Greg's face as he delivered the final blow. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was one of the most extraordinary interviews we've ever had. We'll be right back." The lights dimmed, the music swelled, and the audience exploded again, half in shock, half in wild applause. Within minutes, clips of the meltdown would spread like wildfire across social media. Headlines would scream about Harry's walkout. Commentators would dissect every second of the clash. And Greg Gutfeld, calm and composed, sat at his desk, knowing he had just dismantled one of the most controversial figures in modern royalty. So here's the question. What really triggered Harry's meltdown? Was Greg too harsh, or did Harry finally face the accountability he's been running from all this time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell, because trust me, this is only the beginning. The cameras cut to commercial, but the electricity in the studio didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper, buzzing like static under the Bright lights. Audience members whispered frantically to one another, some pulling out their phones immediately, thumbs racing across screens to share what they had just witnessed. Half the crowd was still clapping for Greg. The other half sat wide-eyed, as if they'd just seen a car crash in slow motion. Backstage, chaos erupted. Producers scrambled, their headsets filled with overlapping voices from the control room. Get another guest ready, now! Keep cameras rolling in case Harry tries to come back. Do not cut to black. The handlers who had escorted Harry and earlier rushed toward the corridor, only to find the prince pacing furiously, his microphone still lying somewhere on the studio floor. He ambushed me, Harry hissed at one aide, his voice raw, his face flushed crimson. That smug little man humiliated me on live television. This wasn't supposed to happen. His fists clenched at his sides, as though he might punch the wall. Another aide tried to calm him, whispering, "Sir, we should leave quietly before." "The press! The press!" Harry snapped, spinning on him. "They'll feast on this no matter what I do. That's all they've ever done." His chest heaved, the once polished composure of a royal prince replaced by the raw fury of a man-cornered. Meanwhile, on the studio floor, Greg Gutfeld was the picture of calm. He sipped from his glass, glanced down at his note cards, and spoke, casually with the stage manager, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the audience could see it, the gleam in his eyes, the quiet satisfaction of a man who knew he had just orchestrated a cultural moment. The commercial break ended sooner than anyone expected. The cameras returned to Greg, alone at the desk. The crowd erupted again, sensing they were part of history. Greg straightened his notes, looked into the lens, and said with his trademark half-smirk, "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just saw was reality. Not a scripted Netflix episode, not a glossy book tour interview, but reality. A man faced with real questions and real accountability, and instead of answering, he walked." The audience clapped loudly, cheers rising above the noise. Greg let it linger before he leaned in closer, lowering his voice like he was letting America in on a secret. "And I'll tell you something else. For all the talk about privacy, for all the talk about freedom, what just happened here proves one thing. Harry doesn't want privacy. He wants control. And the moment he lost control, he ran." The studio erupted again, applause crashing like waves. Greg nodded once, then segued effortlessly into his next segment. But everyone watching at home knew the real story of the night wasn't the comedy or the jokes or even the headlines he had planned. It was Harry. By the time Harry's car pulled away from the studio lot, the meltdown was already trending on Twitter. Within minutes, clips of him shouting, "This is beneath me," had been cut into GIFs, reaction memes, and viral TikToks. One user posted, "Prince Harry storms off Greg Gutfeld like a spoiled guest at a bad dinner party." Another wrote, "He wanted privacy but walked straight into the lion's den." That's not privacy. That's PR suicide. Headlines began to flash. Across digital news outlets, Prince Harry explodes on Gutfeld Live. Royal stormout stuns American TV. Greg versus Harry, the showdown no one saw coming. CNN replayed the clip with solemn commentary. Fox News ran it on loop with panels, already dissecting every word. Even British morning shows picked it up instantly, anchors smirking as they asked, "Is Harry proving his critics right?" Back in California, Meghan's phone buzzed relentlessly. Advisors and friends called one after another, warning that the optics were catastrophic. "You need to get ahead of this," one PR consultant urged. "Spin it before Greg owns the narrative." But Meghan's voice, cold and sharp, cut through. "Let them talk. We've been through worse. Harry will recover." But this time, Meghan wasn't entirely certain. Inside the Bravo control room, Greg's producers exchanged knowing glances. They'd all been part of big moments before, but this was different. The meltdown had the makings of cultural wildfire. A senior producer muttered, "This is OJ interview level. This is going to dominate every network for a week." Greg himself leaned back in his chair once the show wrapped, sipping the last of his cocktail. He looked tired, but triumphant. "I didn't have to push," he told one of his writers. "He crumbled all on his own. That's the thing about entitlement. It can't stand pressure." The writer grinned. "You just made history, Greg." As the hours passed, the internet only amplified. TikTok edits layered dramatic music over Harry ripping off his mic. YouTube commentators uploaded Harry's meltdown explained videos within the hour. Hashtags like #Harry storms out and #Gutfeld vs Harry rocketed to the top of trending lists worldwide. And the public? They were divided. Some defended Harry, calling Greg cruel, accusing him of ambush journalism. "He came on expecting respect," one fan tweeted, "and Greg baited him into a meltdown. Shameful." But far more celebrated Greg's unflinching line of questioning. "Finally someone said what we've all been thinking," wrote another. "Harry left Britain, but hasn't stopped monetizing the crown. Gutfeld just called him out on it." The clip of Greg's final words, "Titles don't make character, palaces don't make integrity, running away doesn't make you free, it makes you lost," was replayed on cable news, stitched into TikToks, quoted in articles, and even printed on T-shirts overnight. By dawn the next morning, Harry's team scrambled into damage control mode. A carefully worded statement was released. Prince Harry left the interview last night due to the host's aggressive and disrespectful approach. He remains committed to using his platform to highlight mental health, veterans' issues, and social justice. He will not be silenced by sensationalism, but the damage was already done. Clips of him shouting, "You're beneath me," had spread too far. That single line overshadowed every defense, every PR attempt. The image of a furious prince storming off an American talk show was seared into the public consciousness. Greg Gutfeld, meanwhile, basked in the glow. His show's ratings spiked to record highs overnight. He opened his next episode with a grin. Last night the prince walked away. Tonight we're still here. Because here's the truth. When the spotlight gets hot, you see who can stand it and who can't. The audience roared, and somewhere, far from the studio lights, Harry stared at the headlines, at the memes, at the endless commentary, and realized something terrifying. In his quest to escape the monarchy's cage, he had built himself a new one of his own making. A cage of cameras, critics, and contradictions he could no longer outrun. And the world. The world couldn't stop watching.